Thank you for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel De La Aloale. On this special edition, this is the last edition before the November 3rd election in 2020. I have with me two powerful, intelligent women, Lasheyl Stroud and Sheryl Munson. One of them is the lead juvenile magistrate in the Court of Common Pleas, Domestic Division in Columbus, Ohio. Another is a public defender of over 24 years. Both women, like I tell you, they are powerful career women. And it's an honor to have two powerhouse on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And this is no, this is your second time on Legal Angle. But at the same time, this could be the first time that some people are meeting you. So I would like both of you to introduce yourself. I'm going to start with the first person on the screen, which is Sheryl. Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate your having me here today. So my name is Sheryl Munson, and as you said, I am in fact a public defender with the Franklin County Public Defender's Office. Originally, I was born and raised in Marion, Ohio, and then I came to Columbus as an undergraduate at the Ohio State University, and then graduated from the Ohio State University College of Law. And my third year as a law student at Ohio State, I became a law clerk with the Public Defender's Office and have been there since. So started as a law clerk, spent about 5 years in municipal court, and now have been going on 22 years in common pleas court, doing obviously what we do there is we defend people who can't otherwise afford counsel. Specifically in the unit that I practice, we're defending people who are charged with felonies, who cannot afford private counsel. And so we do, low-level felonies, but of course I've done, litigation of high-level felonies, murder cases, high-level sex offenses. I've done death penalty work and all of that. So I have dedicated my life to serving the underserved and the marginalized. And this year I do happen to be running for judge in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. And so we're gearing up for the election on Tuesday, the end of the election on Tuesday. So that's who I am. And again, thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, thank you for coming. Lasheyl?
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. My name is Lasheyl Stroud. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. So thank you, Manny, for having us. And thank you, Sheryl. I'm excited to be here with you this afternoon. Sheryl and I have spent a lot of time together over this past year. So I'm grateful to be here with her this afternoon. My name is Lasheyl Stroud. I currently serve as a lead magistrate in domestic relations and juvenile court. So I oversee all of the juvenile magistrates, as well as our court officers and all of our staff. I preside over abuse, neglect, dependency cases, so determining whether children are abused or neglected, and if so, if they should be removed from their home and given to a relative or children's services for a temporary period. I also handle delinquency cases for juveniles and serve on a dedicated docket called the Empowerment Docket for youth who are the victims of human trafficking, to make sure they have the necessary resources and support to flee that lifestyle. I have been a licensed attorney of 17 years. Sorry, my 6-year-old wants to come in. A licensed attorney of 17 years, where I was an assistant attorney general, primarily handled litigation matters, civil and criminal work, public and private sector. Please. I've been at the early vote center all day. So when they saw me come home, they're like, oh, it's time to play. Like, I got one more thing. So sorry, I apologize. I'm a mom of 2 boys, 6 and 10 years old. My husband's a school administrator, a principal at a local middle school. I am a breast cancer survivor, proud breast cancer survivor. Today's the last day of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we've really been celebrating, trying to raise awareness in that area. And now I am a candidate for a newly created seat in domestic relations and juvenile court. So working hard for everyone to vote all of their judges and hopefully to stand proud with Stroud. So looking forward to being here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for coming on the show. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, which is some of the things that have been going on in our society from time immemorial. We'll be talking about misogyny. In July of this year, there were like two incidents in the news. The first one is about one attorney. His name was Dan Olander. He was a male attorney. He targeted a female judge. He drove to her house, knocked on the door, and the first person that came to the door, he shot the person, which happens to be the judge's son. He also he ended up killing that boy. Well, it's a young man. He also shot the judge's husband. Eventually, he had a list of people that he had grievances with that he was planning on killing, but before he could get to the others, he killed himself. But his main reason for going after the judge was because she's a woman and because he has had encounters with her in the past where he didn't get his way. Then in the same month, we have another powerful person. When I mean by powerful, I'm talking about males who are intelligent, have degrees, have educated people that you look up to in the society. So we have another one, a university professor who ended up taking his own life. He was well known to be a female hater, based on the streets, a racist. In fact, they were planning on severing relationship with him. The University of Carolina, by the time he also took his own life. These two stories exemplify the threat and danger posed by misogyny in our society and the people that espouses that kind of thought, or thought pattern or behavior. So, you both of you, like I said, you are great in your field. So, what are your thoughts on, when it comes to this behavior, and especially when it comes to this kind of stories? I'll start with Sharon.
Okay. So, generally speaking, I can tell you, of course, and I know Lasheyl probably tell you that similarly, that, as women, at one time, the legal field is predominantly, dominated by men. And so you're entering that. I do criminal defense work, again, something predominantly dominated by men. In the beginning of our practice, of course, we were practicing in front of mostly male judges. And of course, we're slowly making that transition. So I'm sure we all have personal stories, that we can tell. It's hard for me to say, because I think something that happens when you're doing it day in and day out is a thickening of your skin. And you're like, things that, if you sat back and analyzed them, you're like, wow, that's a really sexist or misogynistic thing to have said. But you're trying to accomplish your goals and do your job. So you just keep moving. But the examples you gave, obviously very extreme and dangerous examples, and it can grow to that, obviously. I think, misogyny is as old as time. We know that, like other isms that we were talking about, racism, and as old as time. But I think that I personally have a concern. I'm raising two teenage daughters that, the climate in the United States right now is particularly troubling. And again, as a judicial candidate, I'm not endorsing anyone, but I can say that I think we can all agree that our current president of the United States has, said some pretty vile things about women. He's referred to our current vice presidential candidate as an it, if you can imagine that. And that kind of discourse inflames people and empowers people. And we saw that, we saw this horrible plot or whatever it was with the governor in Michigan, a woman. And, I'm not specifically pointing fingers, but I am saying that misogyny exists. And if you flame the fires and you legitimize it, and you egg it on, it goes from just these slights that, Lasheyl and I might experience in the courtroom or in everyday life to very, very dangerous situations. So, and the examples you gave are prime examples of that.
Yes, I agree with Cheryl. I believe, number one, just like with any issues, we have to recognize it and say that it exists, that this is an issue, and then it must be confronted and handled in a serious matter, or else things continue to happen over time because it seems as if it's condoned and if that it's okay. In the one situation that you gave, before I even read about that in the paper, my mother actually called me and asked how I heard about it. Because I'm a judicial candidate, but I've been on the bench as a magistrate for the past 7 years. And based on the type of work that I do, I've had parents in my cases to threaten me. Because they don't like the decisions that I make oftentimes. And when it comes to handling people's children and removing people's children from their care, even if they may agree that what they did was not right and that it was harmful to their children, there's still sometimes, and not condoning or making any excuses for them. But I do think that there's some people that, due to like substance abuse issues, and then they start to make threats because of those types of diseases. So I've had to live similar situations. And have people, threaten me personally and say different things that they will do because they don't like my decisions. So it is very unfortunate, but that's why when things like that happen, I report it to the sheriff's department to let people know that even if it's, what you deem to be a joke, if you say something that's threatening in manner, I'm going to take it seriously and make sure that I report it to the authorities. So I think we need to make sure that we handle things whether it's someone saying something, someone insinuating, we have to put a stop to things, and it has to start at the top and come all the way down so that people know that type of behavior will not be tolerated. And so, I remember after I did read the story, praying for her entire family, because I can't speak for anyone else, but for people who are judicial officers, I know for myself personally, it's because I want to do justice and make sure that there's justice for everyone and not just for certain people. And we don't want people who are great candidates, who want to be impartial and unbiased, to be scared away because of situations like those, because we want to make sure that we have the best candidates, that we have diverse candidates in these roles, and that they're free from such threats or behavior. So that's why I think it's important that law enforcement take those things seriously and that people are handled with accordingly.
Yeah, thank you. And what I also find disturbing when it comes to this kind of behavior is normally when it comes to issues of what I call ignorance, you're expected to only be among people who are less educated. So you can say, oh, well, they're ignorant because they don't have education. But now you have this kind of deadly behavior, coming from a school professor who will use a PhD holder, a lawyer who is also a doctor, who has a JD, who has a doctorate degree. So if we have highly educated people espousing this kind of deadly, is it a behavior or line of thought? I don't even know how to categorize it. How well can, as more women start to go up, people like you, how can we push back? Because now it now becomes a battle of intellectuals. You're not just dealing with people who are not on the same educational or intellectual level. So how can we push back against people who are just as highly educated? Lasheyl?
I think we have to, I didn't want to jump to answer, but I think we always have to make sure that we speak up and speak out against any types of injustice, ignorance, any of those isms, that we speak up and we don't let things slide or push things under the rug. I think at least a part of my generation, we were kind of raised to be silent and let your work speak for itself. Right. So if people say things, make comments about you, you just work harder, maybe don't always speak up against it. But I've always been one to speak up. That's why I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old, because I've never been one, to hold back. And I always found a respectful way to let people know if there was something that they were doing or saying that was wrong. So I think we need all of us to speak up and speak out, and then to support each other. So if someone else speaks up against something that is wrong, make sure that you're there standing beside them, shoulder and shoulder, arm in arm, to say that behavior will not be tolerated. And it's difficult because sometimes the negative behavior comes from the top, and then it comes all the way down. And then people see, well, if so-and-so, who's the head of the organization, the agency, or the corporation, if they're allowed to say and do things that are inappropriate, then I know it will be tolerated. Or if someone says something to you and you don't speak up against it, they say one thing one day, something else the other day. The first day it could be, oh, well, you're a good lawyer to be a woman, or you're a good lawyer to be so young, or you're a good lawyer, especially you speak well, especially to be a Black person. Things like that. Call it out when it happens by asking them, like, what does that mean? Exactly. I've had people say, like, when I'm wearing my own t-shirts for my campaign, and they'll say, like, oh, is that you? You look too young, or you don't look like you would be the candidate. What does that mean? I've been practicing law for 17 years. I've been on the bench for 7 years. What does it mean? What does the judicial candidate look like? So I think it's always questioning and speaking up and speaking out, the same thing that we all teach our children to do. I think we have to be the leaders, and whether they're saying it about us personally or we overhear them saying it about someone else, not being afraid to speak up. Because I think, again, when you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. So one day they'll say one thing, another day they'll say something else, and then it will be that gaslighting, like Sheryl talked about earlier, and then the entire group will feel comfortable. I never want people to feel comfortable in my presence with inappropriate behavior. And we can all be respectful and be kind and smile when we say it, but I just won't tolerate things like that because it's inappropriate, and people need to know. So when I'm in my courtroom and I'm on the bench, if I hear someone say anything, whether it's about myself, my staff, a party, or an attorney, I speak up because I set the tone for my courtroom. And I want everyone in my courtroom to be comfortable and to know that it's a place of dignity and respect where I won't tolerate anyone. So I don't let them talk over each other. I don't let people make comments about lawyers or parties. So I think that's the responsibility of a leader, to make sure that you set the tone and that you always speak up and speak out against any injustice.
Thank you, Sheryl.
Well, yeah. So obviously, I agree with so much of what Lasheyl said, but what really, sort of resonated, her point being that once, somebody does speak up, the rest of us have to be supportive in that. It's not always comfortable, to stand up to the bully or whatever. But that is so critical that if we see, is somebody being treated away, I mean, it's what we teach our children, right? If you go to school and you see somebody picking on somebody else, you stand up, take a stand, you could be that one person that makes a difference to walk over and say, that's not how you treat people. So that's critical. And it's very, very easy to get into watching something happen to somebody else and not wanting to get pulled in, and, well, at least it's not happening to me, and you want to spare yourself some kind of victimization. But again, to stand together is to empower us all. And so that's important. Now, we're talking about speaking out even when it's coming from the top. And you're talking about people, with power and education and all of that. To a large extent, obviously, we have to stand up to it, clearly, but we also, I think, have to kind of regrow from the ground up those people that we're putting in power and setting those examples for people. And again, I'm talking about Lasheyl, and this is her story to tell, but a story that I love to hear, that she, as a magistrate, goes out into the community and makes, a plan to let students they play court, right? They see a judge and a prosecutor and a lawyer. And so you're dealing with, children of color, and female children, and you're letting them see them that somebody like me could be in that role, right? So you're planting those seeds to create a power base of people who are going to grow up through diversity and create a more diverse and we think just and fair atmosphere. And even today, out at the early vote center, this young African-American girl came through the line, and you could see that she looked at Lasheyl and you're running for judge. And you could see in her eyes, like this recognition that, wow, somebody like me can run for judge. A powerful woman, a woman of color standing out here running for judge. And, and Lasheyl talked to her and said, here's a picture of me in my robe. And the little girl was just so struck by that. And it's such a beautiful thing to see, which is one of the reasons I love to campaign with Lasheyl, because she does so much of that. But again, yes, I mean, it trickles. There are people in power. There are men in power that can do awful things. And we have to speak out. But a lot of it is we just have to regrow the system. And we're growing from the bottom, and we're raising our children that's not acceptable. We're putting women and people of color and people of all, diverse backgrounds into these positions of power, where I think we will just change the conversation. And it's no longer going to be acceptable. There's not going to be 5 white men sitting around a table making decisions and mocking women, when 2 or 3 of them are women, and some of them are women of color, and they have equal weight and equal say, and they have their seat at that table. And so I think the conversation changes at that point. So, we stand up, we fight against it, we support one another, but at the same time, we regrow the power base so it better reflects all of us, and, a more intelligent, emotionally intelligent, inclusive environment.
Thank you. Yeah, in 2016 election cycle, we witnessed misogyny in our national politics. We had a situation where people would rather vote for a man who was less qualified, who disrespected women or still disrespect women, than vote for a woman who was likely the most qualified person to ever run for president. The irony is that the irony of the whole situation is that a large number of women voted for the man rather than the woman. So my question to you is, what is responsible for a situation like that, where other women will support someone like the current president, who is a self-avowed misogynist? Any takers?
Maybe Lasheyl,
I wish I had an answer.
I can't.
Right?
I don't understand that. I don't understand that, and I know that's the reality of what happens. And I don't know. I mean, isn't it accepting of the narrative that they're accepting the narrative that's where we don't belong there? There is a group of women I know that consider themselves feminists, that believe feminism differently than I do. They think feminism is, that women still belong in the home, and they're serving their husband, and they're serving their children, and that makes them powerful, and that is their power in this world. And they're somehow, protected from the outside world. I'm kind of spitballing here because I cannot explain it. I cannot understand why any woman would have voted, at least, with zeal for the current president, given what clearly how misogynistic he is. I mean, maybe Lasheyl has more insight, but I'm at a loss, honestly.
Right. Unfortunately, I do not have an answer to that. I do believe, though, 2 things that I thought of when you asked your question. One, I believe that sometimes from a very young age, that some women are taught and trained not to support other women. And so I believe that is a part of the issue, which is why I do everything that I can to empower other women, so that we use our voice, because so many people have tried to silence our voice and tell us to take a back seat, and tried to teach us that our voice did not have power and that we were for some reason less than because we are women. So I wholeheartedly believe in empowering women, and that the more young girls that see women working together and not against each other, that we can train up another generation of women who empower each other. The second thing that I thought of when you ask your question is, and I'm not sure if Sheryl was in a similar situation, and if this happens to all candidates or not. But I know that in my consideration for running for judge, have had multiple people tell me that it's not always about your qualifications, that people don't necessarily want the most qualified person for a position, and they don't want to hear about all of those things. That politics is more about, selling yourself, even though sometimes people do it to the extent of selling their souls, so to say, but that it's kind of like you just by any means necessary do whatever it takes, and for people to like you or this person who you pretend to be for a vote, and that it doesn't have anything to do with your qualifications. For me, I rejected that. And have always said that I want to run a campaign that's based on honesty, integrity, and dignity. And I believe that voters do deserve the best qualified people for every race, whether it's a judicial race, the presidential race. I do think that voters do want to know about qualifications and what would make you the best person. But sometimes, because oftentimes the people who have the most money or raise the most money can push forward their agendas. And I think sometimes that's kind of like clouded so that the voters don't really get to see all of the qualifications. And then people just throw things out. And it's not even always supported. It's unfortunate, but people will lie and be dishonest to try to spread lies and falsehood so that it deters voters from looking at qualifications so that they can have the most qualified person in the position. So I think sometimes, just red herrings come up, and then the next thing you know, people are focused on one thing that has nothing to do with who has the most qualifications, but it distracts them. And they don't really get to keep their eyes on the prize, which is having someone who's qualified and capable and able to step into whatever role it is on the first day, upon being elected, and be able to handle the job that they were elected to do with full accountability. And I think sometimes when we do elect people who aren't the most qualified, then when it comes time to hold them accountable, they have nothing to offer us. And then we're upset and complaining. But it's like, you can't complain. If you don't choose to be an informed elector and know who the people are who you're voting, then you can't complain later because you didn't look and dig deeper for qualifications. So I think it's both of those things. So we just have to make sure that we're teaching all women it's okay to collaborate, not compete. Let's celebrate each other, not compete with each other. I am my sister's keeper. I am my brother's keeper. If we all just function in excellence in the role that we were created and purposed to do, we can all work together so that we can all win. We don't have to compete against each other. There's a role for all of us to play. So let's lift each other up, celebrate each other while performing at our best potential as well.
Thank you. You almost segue into what my next question was going to be, which is like when we talk about gender discrimination, sometimes it's not just men who discriminate against other women. Sometimes you have a powerful woman, or even maybe not, they're not even up there, but they just don't believe that another woman is worthy of that position of leadership. And they will either express their disbelief or their doubt, or even work actively towards making sure that that other woman doesn't succeed. So my question is, what is responsible for this kind of behavior, and how can you, as a woman, encourage other women not to be the stumbling block when it comes to rising to positions of leadership. Sheryl?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Lasheyl alluded to it, at least in the beginning of what she was saying, that, sometimes women are raised to compete with other women. And I think specifically, when gender roles were so defined and so rigid, that really it was a woman's goal to get married and have a household and raise children. And even women who were going to college, this concept of they were just going to get their MRS degree, right? Just to meet a man, to marry, and then go back home. So you create this concept that, women are competing for men. And this, ideal life that women are supposed to have. And so just these antiquated views of, what makes you attractive to a man, physical attraction. And, we know that women weren't always educated. They weren't necessarily even taught to read or write. They were taught to sew or to cook, and so they were competing for the roles that society deemed acceptable for them. And so I think that mindset has not completely evolved to the point where now we don't have those rigid boundaries about what we can be. A woman can be anything she wants to be. She can be in any kind of relationship with whomever she wants to be. She can be not be in a relationship. She can go to school. She can not go to school. She can work wherever she wants to work. She can work in, what we perceive as previously male-dominated fields. I mean, those boundaries are gone, but I still think we have this part of our animal brain that we're competing for what we perceive to be limited resources, which may be men. Because our goal is to find a man to make us pregnant and to, set up a household. And so we gotta evolve that part of our brain where, that's not the objective anymore. The objective is that, I can do anything I want. My daughters can do anything they want. And so when we look at this broad perspective, then the best way to achieve those things is in collaboration, right? And in supporting other women, right? Because it's not you and we're not going, down to, wherever the soda shop and competing over the one guy. And so you and I are going to fight over that. It's like, we're both going to go to college and we're both going to study whatever we want to study. And I'm going to help you study and you're going to study and we're going to travel and we're going to do things. And it just, once the world opens up to you and your options are unlimited, there's no reason to compete because the resources and the accomplishments are not limited. They're unlimited. And the greater we are together, the stronger we are together, the more we achieve. And it's, really that simple at this point. And we just need to fully evolve to that idea.
Thank you. I know having the kind of experiences that combine together between the two of you, it's, you have 24 plus 17. You don't get to have those years of experience as a minority without have to take on some hurdles that are put in your path that are not natural. So my next question I'm going to start over the show. What has been your experience with gender discrimination?
Unfortunately, it's been too many to share. And I was contemplating that, as in anticipation of today's discussion. So ever since I was a little girl, I've always been vocal about wanting to be a lawyer. And then when I expanded my goals to say I wanted to be a judicial officer, and people simply because of the way I look, because I was an African-American female, said that I couldn't, shouldn't, and wouldn't. Also because of where I grew up. I grew up in the Linden area. So there were all of these things all these reasons why people counted me out and tried to tell me that I should consider doing something different other than what I dreamed to be. And then it did not stop. Once I became a lawyer, I remember being pregnant and the assumption being made that because I was pregnant, that I was going to stop practicing law. and take time off to stay at home and raise my child and decide if we were going to have other children, and then not return back to the workforce until after my children were of a certain age and perhaps in school. And I was taken aback because it was early in my career. And it's like, no, everyone, and I believe that everyone should be able to make their own decisions. For some people, that's their path and that's what they decide to do. And to them, I celebrate because I believe, we all have the ideas of what's best for us and for our family. And I think everyone should be able to make their decisions within their own households. For me, that was not what my plan was. And I was ready, after having time with our children, my husband and I, to return back to work. So that was the first time where it was just so blatant. And where I had to make a decision about what I was going to do and how I was going to share my own story and create my own story. And I'm grateful now, as I look back, that I did speak up, speak out against it, and use my own voice, and allow myself to continue to go towards my dreams or my goals. Because had I not, I would have missed out on a lot of opportunities and likely not be sitting before you today in the positions that I'm in. But it didn't stop there. I believe there's always people who are going to question you, and it's just because on the surface what they see. I am, the youngest, I believe now. I'm trying to think because we have a few other people, but I believe I am still the youngest magistrate now on the bench. And if I'm not, then the overwhelming majority of the attorneys who come before me, and I'm the lead. So I'm leading people who are older than me, people who have been practicing law longer than I have. But I think it's a grace in which I handle my role and the way in which I lead. I'm a servant leader. So I'm there to be of service to everyone that I lead and to make sure that I'm lifting as I climb. I want to be an inspiration to everyone and to be of service to everyone within my department. But I think for a lot of people, they question that, like, is it okay for me to follow someone who's younger, who's a female, and who's a Black person? So it's like, sometimes you question first for some people because they've never been put in a situation to have to follow someone who doesn't look like them and who's younger than them. So it's challenging all of those stereotypes and then allowing people to have a safe place to be able to share that. Early on, after I took over in this position, we would just have conversations and I would ask everyone, just share whatever it is, whatever your questions are, whatever your reservations are, just share so that we can have open, honest dialogue in a safe space. Because again, back to how we started, you have to be able to address and confront things, or else it will continue and it will come up and manifest itself in your action and your behavior if you don't confront and address situations. So people need to know that they have a safe space to be able to share, because it's foreign for a lot of people to have to follow someone who doesn't look like them, and it's challenging those norms. But I think that's what we're all here for, is to be able to challenge norms, challenge the structural and systemic racism, sexism, classism that exists, especially for those of us who are in the legal field. Because how can you represent someone with these inherent biases? How can you represent them zealously if you yourself has not addressed these things personally within you? So I'm grateful that the judges appointed me to be lead, because I think it did help all of us to address some things within ourselves. But then at the end of the day, it makes us better to be able to carry out our roles.
Thank you. Sheryl?
So, yeah. So first of all, I have to give a lot of credit. So like I said, so I've been a public defender for 26 years. The criminal defense field was fairly male dominated for a very long time. And that was reflected in the public defender's office as well. And there are some very, very strong women that came before me. in the public defender's office specifically, who fought battles that I never had to fight because they fought them. Open hostility, comments about, why aren't you home with your baby? Don't wear pants in my courtroom. Blatant things that I had not had to specifically deal with. But then at the same time, having done it for 26 years, there were times, where a male judge would say, you might be talking about, trying to a sentence, a request you're making for your client. And I've had a judge say to me, spin around in your skirt and then I'll tell you what your sentence is going to be. And you're faced with that. And it's actually strange because for a second you're like, this is the difference between my client going to prison and getting probation. Should I spin around in my skirt? You don't, and that's where you are. And of course, but what I've really learned is, you stand your ground, you make your argument, and they try to intimidate you and they try to bully you, but you come back the next day and you're there the next day. And no matter what you say, and you could tell that sometimes their goal was to make you cry, or they, are you going to cry if I don't give you what you want? And you just keep doing your job and showing back up. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm going to stand up every day on this record. I'm going to advocate. I'm going to do my job. And eventually you're going to respect me, even begrudgingly. You will respect me even if you don't want to. And that often happens. When you stand the bully down long enough, eventually they accept you. Now, you shouldn't have to jump those hurdles to get to that place. But, I have. But I really, the women that came before me, particularly in the criminal defense field, they laid the groundwork for the rest of, for the women who are doing that work now. They went into courtrooms and demanded respect and got it. And so we got the benefit of the doubt to some extent, though, again, obviously I've given you examples where that didn't happen. But, it's progress. You keep doing it, it happens, and I'll have clients, obviously who will say things, for the most part, my clients are good, but you'll have somebody who'll say, I don't want a woman, I just don't want a woman. And it'll be like, well, guess what? You got a woman. So this is what we're dealing with, and I've actually had, and this is kind of, one story that really stands out vividly to me is that I had a client charged with a crime. It was a crime against a woman. And so he was uncomfortable with that, which is ridiculous because I do my job no matter what crime you're charged with or who the alleged victim is. I'm here to protect your constitutional rights and advocate for you. And I will no matter what, even if you don't like me. And so a male private attorney came in and took over the case. And sort of smugly said to me, he's just really more comfortable with a man taking the case. And I'm like, all right. Well, I had already sort of negotiated a plea with the prosecutor that was going to be one thing, a certain number of years in prison. And then the male attorney came in and, wanted the, not the literal head pat, but, go about your way. He wants a man to do this. And I did. And then I think it was probably the next court date. I happened to be in the same courtroom and sat down and watched this male attorney plead the same client to about 10 more years than the offer had been for me. And you don't take pleasure in somebody getting extra time than you feel they should have. But it just sticks out in my mind again and again, and it's just like, and I remember the client looking at me like, I should have stuck with the woman. And sometimes lessons are hard to learn. But again, I think the bottom line is you just keep showing up no matter whatever they want to do. You show up and speak up and stand up. And women did it to pave my path. And I'm forever grateful to them. And it's made it easier for me. But now I have to continue that. I have to continue to create even more quality and equitable environment for the women that come after me to be treated.
Thank you. think you just have to keep showing up. Yeah, I can relate to that story you shared about someone saying they don't want a woman because I had a similar situation with a client, and I was able to negotiate a plea deal for him. He thought maybe because of my color that if he were to fire me and hire someone else who is white, and maybe they will get him a better deal. Like you said, it still got the same time, and possibly end up spending more money and wasting more time thinking that there will be a different result. So now let's move forward to the next generation. We have that little girl or that little boy that will possibly maybe watch this show or listen to it. How do we tell our little girls not to feel intimidated by position of leadership? And how do we raise our boys not to think that because they are males, they have the right of first refusal to leadership positions and that their female counterparts are less qualified? Because most of these things you find out that people are raised to think like that, and they become so ingrained that regardless of education, because they don't teach us this in law school or in med school or in professional schools, they are behaviors that we emulate. So how do we change that narrative? And luckily we are all parents. So Lasheyl.
Yes. So I think we change it. One, we start at home with our own children, our own families who we have influence over in our immediate family. But then I think we all go out into the community. Sorry, my boys are like, oh my goodness, you almost have me. I think then we go out into the community because it's so important to make sure, in whatever position that you're in, that you share the knowledge that you have. So that's why I created the program that Sheryl was talking about earlier. When I go into schools, I do elementary, middle, high schools, and colleges, as well as churches, anyone who will have me. And I share with them because that's my area of expertise, is the judicial system. And then we reenact court cases. But I do it for all youth, whether you're interested in the law or not. One, so that you can learn. And then two, so you can learn how to treat each other. Because I weave in a lot of principles in teaching them, not to talk over each other, to allow every person in there to have a voice. So when they have to be the defense attorney or the prosecutor or the parent or the child, making sure that they see all different types of people, male, female, no matter what color they are, in all of those roles. One, so if they are interested, they can see themselves and get a feel for, and hopefully, ignite a flame inside of them that was already there. And then two, so that they can see all different types of people in these roles, so that they know and that it should be everyone who should be represented roles, and then they learn how to respect each other. And then even in the court case scenarios that we act out, I use a lot of the restorative justice practices so that we can talk about how they treat each other in their day-to-day lives, and then they get to take part in the sentencing or disposition aspect of it. So I think we all owe it to the next generation to, at every opportunity that we get, to use whatever it is that we're all passionate about and the expertise that we have to go out and share, so that the next generation can see us and learn how to treat each other through us. Because my husband and I always talk about, like, it's more than our sons. Right? Because our sons they have to go to school, they go to church with different youth. So we are responsible for those in our community who our children are going to grow up with. Sorry, he wants to sit right here. Okay. So I think we owe it to our community to go out to make sure that we're raising up another generation.
Thank you. Sharon?
Yeah, obviously, yeah, the community involvement that Lasheyl is talking about is so critical. And of course, at home too. I mean, we're modeling. I am, a single mother, though, my daughter's father is very active in their lives. So they do have a solid male role model. But at the same time, as teenagers, especially over this judicial campaign, that I've been running, there have been things when, I haven't necessarily been there this last field hockey season, which was a little strange with COVID and all. I think I might have missed all but a couple games. And there's a little bit of guilt there, but then you have those conversations with them and they're like, you're running a judicial campaign, that's what you're doing. And you have to, it's modeling that there aren't limits to things. And I mean, that's really the big thing for me is that, you can have those little bits of guilt, as a mother, you're putting your kids in daycare or whatever and going to work. But for me, it's so much about role modeling because, I lost my father when I was fairly young. And so my mother was a single mother for a while. But, my mother always worked. And it was really never, and again, what people choose to do, they should absolutely do, however they structure their families. But for me, it was really instilled in me that, you have to be responsible for your own success. You go to work, you create a career, you make your own money, you take care of yourself. And so I've really reflect that back to my children. So I think at home is very important, but at the same time, and Lasheyl deals with youth a lot. I deal with them when they tend to be older, when they've come maybe not from homes where those things were role modeled. And so that's when community activism becomes so important, that all these children and young adults all belong to all of us because they're our future. And so we have an obligation to give back in every way we can. So, I mean, our goal is, to raise them the best that we can. I believe raising girls with ultimate independence and not relying, on a partner and to live and experience as much as they can and to educate themselves as much as they can and then make whatever choices at the end of that are best for them. And I just think that, that's what we do. And then step into the community and do that for others as well.
Okay, thank you. And what both of you are doing right now, which is like running for office, is something that wouldn't have been possible 100 years ago, 70 years ago, even 60 years ago. So you are actually creating history, even right now, you're making history. So I would like both of you to tell us about your candidacy and what led you to decide to run for office and why people should choose you over your opponent. Sheryl first.
Okay, thank you. So, for some people, they will tell you that like maybe their entire lives, they sort of like, I wanted to ultimately become a judge. I saw myself being a judge. That's what I wanted to do. And that's not really my story. I referenced earlier, having lost my father when I was younger. I lost my father to addiction and suicide when I was pretty young. I was the first person to go to college in my family. So I was the first person to go to law school. And I owe that, again, to my mother, who was determined that I was going to succeed. And she helped me to do that. And so then once I went to law school, I had a mentor there. And in talking about what to do with my legal degree, I really talked a lot about, I just really want to be there for people, when they're at the lowest point of their lives, because no matter what somebody has done, and this is true, particularly, you see this in death penalty work and higher level, felony murder cases where maybe guilt is not even the question. We know that this person did a horrific thing, but no matter what somebody has done, they are still a human being and they still have worth and they still deserve one person, at least one person in this world that cares about what happens to them. And so I was really committed to that idea. And so my mentor in law school said, I think you belong at the public defender's office. And so I spent my time there. Again, I love that work. I love being there for people who have no one else to be there for them. I mean, as you know, when you do sometimes court appointed work, you don't always, there's not a lot of gratitude necessarily. They might not like the result. They think that you have not necessarily done the best for them, but a lot of times that's because you're the only one there, right? And you're their sounding board, and so you're their target. But despite all of that, it not being necessarily the easiest job, or the job with the most gratitude attached to it, I loved my work, and I love my work. But right now, there are no former public defenders on the common pleas bench in Franklin County. And that's a big problem to my mind. We have some wonderful judges in Franklin County, and don't get me wrong. But, a lot of them, they're coming from the prosecutor's office or coming from private practice. And I just think that we're missing that there's a void in diversity of perspective without having a public defender there. Because, as a public defender, you're defending them. I mean, it's about their constitutional rights, their legal rights. You're doing the motion work, the trial work, and all of that. But at the same time, you're kind of dealing with the whole person, because so much our clients aren't even starting at the same place that some of the other criminal defendants in the system are, right? We're pulling them up to get them at least on equal footing with everyone else. People who don't have transportation to court, they don't have childcare. So that, one of my colleagues may sit out in the hall with a client's child so they can make a court appearance. Or they don't have clothes and we're making sure they're suitably dressed for court, or just afterwards, giving them lunch money or bus fare. I mean, and then of course, finding them treatment programs, alcohol and drug and mental health treatment. So there's so much to treating the whole person that I think brings a really unique perspective. I would bring that unique perspective to me, with me to the bench, particularly in dealing with, we see so much right now about implicit bias and systemic racism. And, certainly I can tell you after 26 years, the two greatest barriers to justice are income and race. And there's no way around that. And so we have to meet people where they are. And we also have to hold people accountable. There's a trend I've seen that, when we're having motion hearings and talking about police officers staging stops and searches, that judges are so often just deferring to whatever the police officer testifies to, right? But I've had these cases, I've been with, looked at the evidence where I know that they're simply not telling the truth, right? And I think we need judges who are willing to stand up and say that. This was not a good search. It's not enough to say that no matter what happens, I'm not going to hurt you that much on sentencing, because justice starts earlier than that. So we need judges who are willing to stand up and do the right thing and be honest about who's being honest and who's not being honest, and about who's being biased and who's not being biased, and give just outcomes. It's not just about, at the end of the day, I won't sentence your client to prison. Well, but maybe my client shouldn't even have been convicted, because maybe that police officer didn't even tell the truth at the motion hearing stage. It just has to be legitimate from start to finish to allow people to reinvest their faith in the system, and to treat people fairly. And so it's really that has motivated me to run. I kind of feel like it's a moral imperative that someone from the public defender's office needs to be up there. And I've been so supported by my colleagues to do that. And I'm really, really hoping that come November 4th, we're going to have a former public defender on the bench in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. So thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Michelle, I'll let you have the last word.
Thank you. So 2 parts: why run for judge, and then why vote for me in this particular race. So what inspired me to run for judge? Like I said before, I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. It was the only thing I wanted to do, but I never saw anyone who looked like me doing what I wanted to do. I would watch television shows like Matlock with my grandmother, didn't see anyone in the role of lawyer who looked like me, but she always encouraged me and said, you can do it, you will do it. And then when I was in high school, I met someone who looked like me. She came to our school to speak at an assembly, and she was a judge in domestic relations and juvenile court. And that sparked something inside of me to say there was someone who wanted to be a lawyer, and that she had continued on after she practiced law to fill the role of judge. So when I was in high school, I went down to the courthouse here in Franklin County, observed magistrates, they were called referees back then, and judges. And I said, one day after I practice, I too want to be a judicial officer, because I'm always the one that my friends and family come to ask for help when they're trying to make decisions, and not even always decisions related to the law, but just life decisions because of the way that my brain works. I'm a decision maker, and it comes naturally to me. So I believe that my purpose is to make decisions, and then my knowledge of the law and my strong hope for justice for all people is what makes me a great judicial officer now as a magistrate. So once this new seat was created in our court over the past 20 years, since I first clerked here for that same judge the first year after law school, it confirmed my passion in domestic relations and juvenile court. So throughout this past 20 years, I've worked in every single area of our court. I know domestic relations and juvenile court inside and out. I can say with confidence and honesty that in our particular race, I am the most experienced, most credible, committed, and compassionate candidate. I have handled jury trials, bench trials, argued before the Court of Appeals, the Ohio Supreme Court. I've represented parents and children in domestic relations and juvenile court as their attorney, as well as a court-appointed guardian ad litem, as well as a volunteer lay guardian ad litem as CASA. So all of that experience has led me here. And just like Sheryl said, it was a sense of moral responsibility. Because that's the way I was raised. If you are prepared and you have the qualifications, if something comes available, that you should take the risk and take the chance to go for it. So that's why I'm running for judge. That's why I'm working hard for all of Franklin County to stand proud with Stroud. Every nonpartisan union and group that I've screened for has endorsed my candidacy over my opponent's candidacy. I'm also the preferred lawyer. They're playing games, my children. The preferred lawyer in the lawyers poll. But I really want to serve my community and believe that I can take the bench without any delays, injustice, if I am elected. So please stand proud with Stroud. Vote Stroud for judge. He's saying bye.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Lasheyl and Sheryl, for coming onto Legal Angle today. You've made this hour and 2 minutes very productive. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's so good to have both of you.
Thank you. It was great to be here with you.
Yes. I want to thank you also personally, Emmanuel, for this series that you've been doing. It's such a benefit to the community that you've gotten so many people and faces in front of people so they can make informed decisions, in judicial races and other races you've done, and either other people outside of candidacy altogether. But I just really want to thank you for the good work that you're doing. I also want to thank you for pairing me with Lasheyl Stroud, who is my good campaign buddy, who I love and admire so much. No matter what happens out of this race, the fact that I've made her as a friend will have made it worth it. So I want to thank you for all of this and this opportunity. And thank you, Lasheyl, for being you. I just want to say that.
Thank you, Sheryl. The feeling is so mutual. We would see each other from my days in general division to just practicing law here in Franklin County, because we really do have a small bar. But I have grown to know Sheryl personally and even more professionally. So I had a very high regard and admiration for her and the work that she do. I know oftentimes firsthand that, like she said earlier, sometimes public defenders, that the work that they do is discounted, but it's great selfless work that they do day after day. Sometimes even despite, the confrontation or people considering them less than, as if public defenders aren't lawyers. But I just appreciate the fact that she is living out her purpose and stuck with it, and did that knowing that she really is making a difference. And Manny, I thank you, for these topics. Both times I was like, I'm not sure what we're about to talk about. So it was a little challenging, but I think, I appreciate it. And it does give the viewers an opportunity to hear more, than our regular stump speeches, so that they can get to know us as people, as opposed to simply as judicial candidates. So I have great admiration for all of the work that you do, everything that your wife does, and everything that you all are doing in the community, to make sure that we have an informed electorate, and that viewers really are learning more about the great work that you do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate both of you. And for those of you, watching us or listening to us, thank you for joining us again. Until next time, stay safe.
Bye-bye all.